Frid och shalom vänner och välkomna till en uppdatering idag. Och vi tar och tittar på Lukas 21:29. Han gav dem också en liknelse: se på fikonträdet och på alla andra träd. Så snart ni ser att det knoppas förstår ni av er själva att sommaren är nära. När ni ser att detta händer vet ni på samma sätt att Guds rike är nära. Amen, säger jag er, detta släkte ska inte förgå förrän allt detta har skett. Himmel och jord ska förgå, men mina ord ska aldrig förgå. Men akta er för att berusa er, dricka er fulla och låta era hjärtan tyngas ner av dagens eller livets omsorger. Så att den dagen, Herrens dag, alltså en tidsperiod som vi varken vet början på men vi vet slutet, den ska komma plötsligt över er som en snara. Ty den ska komma över alla som bor på jorden. Vaka alltid och be om kraft att kunna undfly allt som kommer och kunna bestå inför människosonen. Här ser vi att snaran kommer över alla, det vill säga också över kristna. Den ska komma över alla som bor på jorden, står det här. Vers 36 enligt grekiska då. Be och vaka ständigt så ni kan räknas bland dem som är värdiga. Ja, vi har ju ingen värdighet i oss själva utan räknas som rättfärdiga, med andra ord. Att kunna komma ut ur X, står det där, snaran, alltså Herrens dag, va? Så att du kan stå upp, histemi, stå upp inför människosonen. Det här är jätteviktigt att vi förstår. Efesierbrevet 6 talar om att göra oss i ordning för en strid, och han säger att det är inte mot kött och blod, som sagt var. Och här nämns den onda dagen. Här nämns också frälsningens hjälm som ett beskydd mot ondskans andemakter som råder i mörkret. Samma sak skriver David i psalm 140, vers 5-6. Det står lite olika där, versindelningar som ni vet kanske i King James och i den svenska. På hebreiska står det alltså det helmet eller hjälmen av Jeshua som ska täcka över mitt huvud på stridens dag, står det där. Så det är alltså samma sak, stridens dag, Herrens dag och den onda dagen. Någonting ska komma alltså, som vi behöver vara vaksamma emot. Och han talar här om att snaran och ondskans andemakter i himlarymderna, de har ju en plan då, det är ju att bedra hela världen. Det står ju där i Uppenbarelseboken. Satan vill bedra hela världen. Men vi som tror på Jesus, vi ska vara vakna. Vi ska inte fastna i den här snaran. Det är det Bibeln talar om. Vi strider alltså inte mot kött och blod. Så Paulus använder alltså bilder som David tar till exempel i psalmerna när det gäller Satans listiga anslag. Jag vill efter djupa studier i psalm 140, vers 5-6 se här att laglöshetens hemlighet är uppenbara här i den hebreiska texten i psalm 140. I mina studier har jag kommit fram till följande, alltså psalm 140, vers 5 och 6 i den svenska bibeln. G står det där, det betyder alltså den självupphöjde. Och det är ju Satan, Jesaja 14. Han kallas även för djävulen, åklagaren eller den starke mannen. Ormen också för den delen. Taman sen har i en hemlighet. Alltså Satan har en hemlighet. Ja, det kallas ju i andra Thessalonikerbrevet 2 för laglöshetens hemlighet. Och ordet pach här betyder en snara för att fånga fåglar i. Fåglar är alltså en bild på själar. Eller ett nät, rechet, ett nät som betyder att fånga djur i, och det är också själar. Och sen står det händer här, jad, det betyder ju kraft, auktoritet också. Han får ju auktoritet av Gud att handla. Magal betyder att detta nät omringar hela lägret, färdig att dras åt. Så vi ser här alltså en hemlighet som håller på att dras åt, och den, säger Jesus då, profeten, gäller hela världen. Sen har vi mogesh. Det betyder att man har satt upp ett bete i en fälla som är färdig att slå igen. Fånga själar också. Och vi vet ju av psalm 91, så står det ju där att vi som tror är i den allsmäktiges hemliga ställe, där bor vi. Det är ju precis lik Abraham, ni vet, som var under en ek när Herren kom och skulle döma Sodom och Gomorra. Då uppenbarar han ju hemligheten för Abraham först, och det ska han göra för oss också, vi som följer Herren. Och i Ordspråksboken 1:17 står det att det är meningslöst att breda ut nätet inför ögonen på fåglarna, själarna. Så det är alltså en hemlighet som skall uppenbaras för dem som följer lammet, men skall alltså stängas för dem som inte vill följa lammet. Och i Uppenbarelseboken så står det ju att alla som inte är skrivna i livets bok och följer lammet alltså skall följa vilddjuret, och vi ser där att vilddjuret har fått makt av Satan alltså. Gud ger Satan auktoritet, och Satan ger olika människor förmågor och auktoritet att handla. Det ser vi i Uppenbarelseboken 13. Så laglöshetens hemlighet skall vi förstå och vara uppmärksamma på. Och det här klippet som kommer nu, det tar upp att snaran håller på att dras åt. Det är ju ganska tydligt vad det är för makter som verkar bakom allt det här. För det första är ju Gud som har all makt, som tillåter att Satan alltså får tilldelad auktoritet att handla. Och snart kommer det upp 7 huvuden och 10 horn, säger Uppenbarelseboken. Alltså en världsregering. Och i det här videoklippet som kommer just nu så ser vi klart hur det här nätet eller snaran håller på att dras ihop. Varsågod.
Things got any better or they got worse?
It's getting darker. That's the best way I can describe it. You know, we could take it from the last census that was published, and the last census saw a massive reduction in Christianity.
Okay.
So Christianity being in the minority now, and yet even though people who put down Christianity, that's a wide base. That's maybe that their parents were Christian or they're culturally Christian, but they're not saved.
Yeah.
But we saw a massive spike, 156% increase in Satanism. And then we've seen a massive spike in Wicca. And quite often that's something that we've dealt with as a church. It's something we've dealt with as a ministry in terms of, you know, actually being in that process of witnessing and dealing with Satanists and those of the Wiccan community.
Wow.
And it's kind of, it's all come under that New Age umbrella.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Sure. Wow. So with this vacuum that's left, and that's amazing how paganism and Satanism has taken the place. You know, the funny thing is we were just in Switzerland, and they were saying the same thing.
Yeah.
And they said, really, Brandon, it's ancient paganism, and it's like all the superstition stuff that's taken over. And so it's now you're confirming it's happening here too. So that's something's going on here. Spiritually bad.
Yes.
Okay, so you're a remnant pastor. You have a remnant church. When you're on the street, when you're talking to people, where are their heads at as far as not just spirituality, But as far as where the EU is going, where their country is going, do they care? Or are they just buying into all this stuff like the DEI, the ESG, the Go Green? I mean, as an example, I'm here and the hotels won't let you change the dial on the temperature.
Yeah.
So are they just, what's going on?
There's a leftist agenda that has been accepted by so many. Now, if on the street witnessing to people, I think it splits into two camps. I think you've got those who are hungry and witness what's going on, and it's shocking to them. And then there are those who are completely engaged with that type of thing.
Really?
And it's maybe, it could be split to some degree generationally. That certainly the younger ones tend to be all for alphabetic identification and all for, you know, the trans movement, the furries movement, all of this type of thing.
Right.
There's also a class difference in this sense that quite often those who have maybe came from a middle upper class sort of upbringing, regardless of where they're at now, upbringing, or their university influence has been upon them, you know, in the sense that they changed the way they think.
Sure.
In terms of diversity, equity index and so on, and ESGs, I personally, like, last year I had to fill in a form from the government for my business, and it was literally about this thick.
Whoa.
And every question was on how us as a centre, as a business, how we benefit the environment and who do we employ and of what realm are they. Now, I filled it in, and every question was NA, not applicable. So it's just, and that's the way I could send it back, because I couldn't take that seriously.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to it, you're seeing so much with diversity, equity index, ESGs, and this is what I was saying to you. There's a law that was pushed in Europe in the summertime, just pre-summer, called the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. And what this is all about is enforcing ESG and DEI regulations under a law condition. So this isn't just the companies adopting this. This will be regulation and law.
Wow.
But this goes further than the European Union. So if you're in America and you're dealing with with a company in Europe, and say for instance you're a supermarket or whatever, and I'm getting dairy products from you.
Right.
As I'm in Europe, your company has to be able to adhere to the ESG DEI regulations.
Oh.
Goes further.
Wow.
Not just your company, whoever supplies your company. So if it's a farm, like Mama and Papa, you know, they have to make sure that they are adhering to DEI, ESG regulations so that they can supply you and you can supply Europe. And all of this, it's like the tentacles of this thing coming out. So it's quite severe.
So it's going all through the chain, and they figured out a way to get everybody in that chain of supply.
Yes.
Wow, that's nefarious, Steve. That's crazy.
Big time, big time.
So, okay, so let me ask you this. We just had in America a big election. We elected Donald Trump, and there was a pushback against this DEI, ESG stuff like that, and people just got fed up with it. And we saw in America people from all different flavors of political persuasions come together and saying, we're done with this. Is there any undercurrent here in Europe of a pushback of saying, you guys have taken this too far? This is ridiculous. Is there a groundswell, or are people just taking it?
Well, there is a groundswell in the sense that there are protests, there are people who are fed up with it.
Yeah.
However, what we've seen in terms of that groundswell is the change in legislation and the change in procedure. So, for instance, if we take the protests back in the summer, we witnessed about a mile from our church there were protests going on.
Okay.
Now, obviously with protests you get a bad element, you sometimes get people rioting, but the majority will be innocent, sort of peaceful protesters. There were people arrested for not partaking, but for being in the vicinity watching.
What?
And these people who are arrested, it goes to immediate. So basically, what they've been, there was a whole thing that across the UK, they were advised to by their solicitors, court-appointed solicitors, to plead guilty. And if they pled guilty, boom, immediate sentencing. So we have seen people imprisoned for, you could say, resisting the diversity, equity, indexed agenda online by, you know, having open rhetoric, saying something, or we've seen people arrested for being bystanders. We've seen someone arrested for shouting at a police dog, and these people are immediately sentenced.
Holy moly.
Now, this shows you the flip of things. And the flip of things on that side, we have seen dangerous criminals released.
Yeah.
So not just we've seen paedophiles released,
Yeah.
but we've also seen, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that the UK decided to release 2 major Islamic terrorists from prison, from incarceration. These were people who plotted to blow up Parliament, and they were foiled by MI5 at the time, and they were serving their time. And even if they go back to 2007 in their sentencing, the judge said you should never be released. But under this new administration, they're out.
Wow. So it sounds to me you have a 2-tiered system of justice.
Yes.
And help me understand, why would these European elites flood their countries with immigrants that hate the country, hate the people, and then let them get away with murder, literally?
Yes.
And yet we're going to jail people for posting stuff on social media, for standing close to a riot, or whatever it is. What's happening? What is that? Are they intentionally trying to destroy the West? What is this?
My personal opinion is yes.
Okay.
I think if we take Sir Keir Starmer, Sir Keir Starmer was a member of the Fabian Society, so he believes in Depop.
Yeah.
He believes in eugenics. And if you look at when those protests started out, I think if he had turned around and said, there's validity to what you're saying, but let's just get to the bottom of it, I don't think you would have seen the same protests on the street. I don't think it would have went to the same degree, but instead he didn't. Instead, he completely ostracized part of the populace by calling them names, by saying they're this, that, and the other. Yet, if you'd actually looked at those protests, there were people from every walk of life there, and every race, and they would just had enough. In terms of immigration, the doors have been open here for a while. If you go down to Dublin, Dublin, and part of Dublin is nicknamed Tent City because they have tents everywhere.
Wow.
We go out, and every week we do a homeless outreach, and you will see the contingent changed. Now, I'm absolutely plain about it. I don't care what background you're from. We're feeding you, we're praying with you, and we're witnessing to you. However, there's a discrepancy in how they're treated. So what we're seeing is nationals and people who are homeless on the street right now, quite often abandoned.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing as well is those who come over from under the term irregular migration, they're put in a 5-star hotel.
Oh boy.
So the government enacted this a while ago where they would give, they would take a 5-star or 3-star, 4-star hotel, and they would say to the owner, we will pay you X amount, say $1 million, for you to close your doors to the public, and we will use you as a housing centre for migrants. Now the problem is you can see the two-tier system straight away of this, and you can see why it upsets people, because then people have got their flat screen TVs, they get fed by a gourmet restaurant every single day, and yet you're watching veterans and people lying on the street. So there's two-tier in that way, there's two-tier in the response, there's two-tier in the policing. However, even if you say this, you're a target. So by like, I've been on shows saying this before, and I get calls from my family saying, be careful, be very careful what you're saying.
I bet.
You still got to say it.
Yeah, right. The truth has to be said.
Yeah.
Well, I'm watching from afar a guy like Tommy Robinson.
Yes.
And, you know, just he was on Jordan Peterson, and I listened to the interview, and he was explaining himself. And it seems like, as an example, here's a guy they targeted because he was exposing what was going on with the Islamic immigration.
Yes.
And there was gangs and rape gangs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he's exposing it. All of a sudden, they bring some crazy charges on him that really are not legitimate.
Yeah.
And I think he's in jail.
Yes, he is, yeah.
And like he was saying to Jordan Peterson, is like, they know by putting me in jail that I can be killed in jail because of the Islamic people in jail. They'll kill me. And you start realizing, wait a second, that's very nefarious. Where's the rule of law? You were telling me before we came on the air that people who have been arrested, and instantaneously sentenced. There was no, was there a trial? Why are they foregoing the natural thing?
Well, this is what a lot of people have asked. What seems to have been the case is that those individuals who were arrested were going in under the instruction of whatever legal representation they had.
Okay.
And the legal representation or the legal advice was to plead guilty. So if you're accused of, you know, protesting, or if you're accused of, like I said, shouting at a police dog, plead guilty. And the effect of that has caused immediate sentencing. But to show you the debacle of it all, like the craziness, at the same time, there's no room in UK prisons. So what they did at the start of September, they enacted Operation Early Dawn, which was the release of prisoners. So these prisoners who are maybe sentenced to, let's say, 8 years for violent crime, once they've served half of their crime, they're normally up for parole, but now it's only a fraction. And I think 2,000 were released onto the streets. People are being released who are serving violent. Now, initially the government came out and says, no, it will not be violent prisoners. But then it was exposed. Yes, it was. It was violent prisoners. It was people who had been involved in abuse, in paedophilia, you know, and all of that, and they're released back on.
Wow.
What's seemingly the point of this is to make room for what I would call political prisoners, people who are disagreeing with the narrative. Now, when we talk about Donald Trump, yes, he is on the scene, and you can see that has upset the apple cart of populism. But what you're seeing right now, which I think people need to be aware of, different alliances are being made. So right now you've seen Sir Keir Starmer continually over in France with Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron has called for the restructuring of Europe, which is something he called for before, but now it's building up momentum. You're seeing all of this happening, and I think it is just laying the ground for the building of the reconstituted Roman Empire more in line with what the Bible says. And all of this is happening, and I think, like, in terms of Donald Trump, he was the right candidate to win, 100%. I think there is a target on him, and I think there's an agenda. And if we look at what has happened in this week alone, with Putin's putting down the nuclear guideline, this is the threshold. America and England crossing the threshold. And then you get a statement from a former statesman or spokesperson for Putin saying that there may be a nuclear war or a nuclear attack upon the UK by Christmas. It's all planned, and I think it's planned. It's like a grenade thrown in before the inauguration. Because if Donald Trump is the one who is going to bring peace over those situations, now he's going to have his hands tied. Sorry for talking so long.
No, you're absolutely right. Because we're saying the same thing. Is like, we don't know how long Donald Trump will last because the deep state is still there. We have these, just whether it's the State Department, the Pentagon, or all these different organizations, they're still there. They haven't moved. And they've been eerily silent. But watching Biden allow Ukraine to fire those rockets into Russia, dude, it's like they're inciting World War III. It's like they want that. I mean, we talk about it from the United States, about the military-industrial complex, and then you start figuring it out. There's all these companies that look to gain millions and billions of dollars from a war. And then you find out that BlackRock's involved in all of this in the Ukraine, and these companies selling military. And you're really realizing these guys are warmongers.
Yes.
And they profiteer off of war. But yet, Gary, they're playing with nukes. I think I would believe Putin that when he draws the line saying, you guys are pushing me to the limit. I'm not a fan of Putin, but they just keep kicking the sleeping dog.
That's just it. And we've already seen that Russia is now mass producing nuclear fallout shelters. And yet, what is the response from the UK? They allow Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles to attack Russian territory, and then they take on the same week the decision to start defunding and reducing their own military, so scaling back their own military.
Wow.
Now, I don't know how that works in logic sense, because even the head of the UK military has said that by 2027 he expects the UK to be at war with Russia.
Wow.
So all of that on the scene, and yet the UK government is saying, you know what, we don't need this amount of soldiers or this amount of weapons, let's just get rid of that. And it goes back to your original statement, is this a purposeful sort of deconstruction or attack upon the Western society? And I think it is. I think there is an elite agenda to deconstruct. You know, if we take the old WEF and Biden slogan of build back better, well, you can't build back better whilst the building is still there. You have to deconstruct the building first.
Break the whole thing down.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting, and you know about this too. Back in September, the UN, 193 nations by consent agreed to this Pact for the Future.
Yes.
And you're acquainted with it, and it has 3 features. It gives the Secretary General emergency powers on anything he deems a crisis.
Yes.
And then we have this bringing the youth in the decision-making process, which is crazy. I think that's indoctrination.
Yes.
Okay. And then you have the last one is they really, read between the lines, they want to control AI.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gary, with those 3 factors, it seems to me that is moving it one step forward towards really what they want. Like you say, deconstruct everything and then build this one world government.
Yes.
Do you see the same thing I'm seeing?
I 100% do. You know, if you look at they sort of try to cover every area. You know, we had the WHO pandemic accord, which obviously didn't fully get in May, but they've made the decision that they're going to push it in by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But if you look at what they did with that, they changed the IHR, the International Health Regulations from 2005. So they basically updated that in line with the WHO Pandemic Accord, and it too, just like the UN Future Summit, basically hands powers over to one individual.
Yeah.
So in that term, it would be the head of the WHO. In the UN terms, it would be Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General.
Yeah.
And to me, that's in prep for the one figure that they're looking for.
Yeah.
And it all strikes me that obviously I believe that the timing is in God's alone. It's God's timing alone. However, they are planning.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt about it. You know, the 2030 agenda and even 2025. So the Alice Bailey's book, Externalization of Hierarchy in 2025, talks about basically the real leaders coming on the scene from that point forward. And I think that what they're doing is preparing, and they truly believe that they have to be ready for one individual. And it goes back to the Masonic, it goes back to the Luciferian ideal, you know, that they believe Lucifer is the real God.
Yeah.
And you're seeing this, it's not just done through legislation like the Future Pact Summit, or the Future Summit Pact. Yeah, it's not just done through legislation in that way. It's everything is being used, whether it's media, whether it's just, you know, displays through films.
Yeah.
Not to go on sideways here, but I just done a video on the new Jack Black Christmas movie.
Okay.
Where a kid writes to Santa, but spells it wrong. So he comes on the scene as Satan to grant his wishes. And it's normalization of and preparing a people to be ready and to accept someone, like it says in John 5, that people will flock to a guy who comes in his own name. In terms of the youth, Well, it's straight off the back. It's similar to that movie, Prepare the Youth. This generation has no confidence in who they are. They have an identity crisis like never before.
Right.
Where people don't know if they're human. They don't know what sex they are, if they are human.
Yeah.
They don't even know what sexual preference, because they qualify themselves as pan. All of this stuff that's just, I can't even keep up with it.
Right.
And because there's such an identity crisis, what they're looking for and preparing for is one person to come on the scene and tell them what their identity is.
There you go.
Whereas you and I know that Matthew 16, our identity is on the solid rock of who Jesus is. And then AI, well, AI will be the whole tying up of things on how this is done. You know, like what we've seen with the talks today and your talk yesterday, and how we're basically not just being pre-framed, we're being led down the garden path in one direction.
Yeah.
And it's all coming together. And I will say to any other pastors in Northern Ireland, any other people in this way, just wake up. We need to be alerting everybody to what is going on.
Yeah, no, that's good words of wisdom, and you're spot on. So here's the thing. It's all in God's timing, as you know. But it seems like they're trying to accelerate things.
Yes.
And I know when we had Joe Biden in office, which was a disaster, that guy popped the clutch, and he was allowing all kinds of things we have never seen before.
Yeah.
And it seems that they all have the same memo.
Yes.
Okay? It seems like that there's a pre-narrative that everyone has been given. This is the rules. Whether I'm talking about Canada or Australia, or I'm coming to Ireland or wherever. So it tells me there seems to be a group, and I don't know what you want to call them, that's pulling all the strings, telling the media what to say.
Yes.
I've seen YouTube videos of different journalists, like maybe 30 of them, all saying the same thing.
Yes.
And I'm sure people have seen this. So, who are these people? Whether we call it the cabal, whether we call Luciferians, where are they? Are they? When we talk about the global elite, who are they? Where are they from? Do we even know? Are they just faceless, nameless people behind the scenes that are eventually going to come on the scene? I'm trying to figure this out. I know they exist.
Yes.
And I know it's Luciferian.
Yes.
I just want to, is it a group of 200? What is it? The Bilderbergers? Is it, the George Soroses of the world? What is your take on that?
I would say that, yes, it's Soros, it's Rockefeller, it's all of those ones with power. And where that power tends to rest nowadays, in my opinion, is in the big corporations, in the finance sector, in the World Bank, in the IMF, all of those, because certainly in terms of pulling strings politically, that's where the power rests.
Yeah.
So I think back to, now whether there's, and I'm sure there are people behind the scenes on this too, who are probably the puppet masters. But when we look at the political movement of things, the ones who control the purse strings are the ones dictating the political movement.
Yeah.
Pfizer, all of those companies, they determined what the media said, but they also determined what the political policy was.
Yeah.
If you go back to a few of our prime ministers ago, and we go back to Liz Truss.
Okay.
Liz Truss served office for 42 days. And she served office for 42 days, and she's exposed this in her book. And I wasn't a fan of Liz Truss, but she was more conservative. And she certainly was more conservative in the policies that she was going to bring in. This seemed to upset the apple cart.
Sure.
2 days before she released her economic policy, the Bank of England, our central bank, decided to sell off government bonds. Now, if you do that, what you automatically get is a market volatility moment. So you get the market going up and down, or it crashes.
Yeah.
So it turned out the market crashed, and they turned around and pointed, because 2 days later she was going to bring out her financial policy, and they said, it's your fault, and she had to resign.
Wow.
Now, then we've seen individuals like Maloney come into power.
Okay.
And she came off the back of basically a very right-wing conservative campaign. But yet when she came into power, and it was around about the same time as Liz Truss, I believe that she looked at what happened there and she started to toe the line and she started to become more centralist in her policy.
Yeah.
So I believe that certainly when it comes to those who have the power, it's those who control the purse strings.
Yeah.
And they're the ones directing it towards CBDCs,
Yes.
directing it towards, you know, the digital coins and the stable coins and all of that. And I think that there will be something coming up in terms of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I think that once we get to the inauguration, what you will see is pressure from the Fed. Now, either they're happy with what he's doing, or happy with some decisions he makes, but if he goes against the grain, they're going to see, I believe you'll see pressure coming in that way.
Yeah.
Maybe it's automatically the Fed starts selling off government bonds and the market starts to crash, and then the pressure comes on him. But I do believe there will be some economic pressure applied upon him. Certainly they're trying it now in terms of the upset with Ukraine and Russia, but I think the economic pressure will come from the inauguration.
You're hitting the nail on the head, because we watched in America, and this happened this last summer, those who had the money and the purse strings change out Joe Biden with Kamala Harris in 48 hours.
Yeah.
There was 14,000 electoral voters that just got missed.
Yes.
And they just switched the candidate. And they set Joe Biden up as an interesting thing to show the world he's failing. We got to get a new candidate. And they switched in Kamala within 48 hours. And it all came down to who held the money.
Yes.
They call them Democratic donors or whatever.
Yes.
But Gary, when I see that, and that they're able to change a political candidate just like that, that's power. And you're absolutely right. I agree. They have been silent since Donald Trump got in. But I think we're waiting for the next shoe to fall.
Yeah.
Because he's taken Elon Musk, he's taken Vivek Ramaswamy, and they're going to cut and slice up the government.
Yes.
They're going to get rid of the Department of Education. They might even get rid of the IRS and have no income tax.
Yeah.
He starts going in and doing that, they're going to rear their ugly head. So I totally agree with your theory. I'm on the same ticket. I see the same thing. So there's a lot of things brewing. And so here's my last question, and I gotta let you go because I've kept you too long, man. It's good stuff, man. I could talk all day about this stuff, man. So the average person sitting out there, this is happening. A lot of this stuff is out of their control. Okay,
Yes.
well, I can't control World Economic Forum or these global elites. What can the average Christian do? Even though we know all this is happening, it's going in a certain direction, what can they do? What would you tell your congregation?
First off, don't fear. That's the main thing. You know, our hope is in Jesus Christ. It's not in a political structure, nor is it in man's construct. And yes, we live in this world and we have to abide by those things, but we don't fear what man brings. And when you're not, when you operate outside of the realm of fear, and you know that Jesus is with you no matter where you go, no matter what you do, he is with you. It gives you that boldness that they would have had in the book of Acts.
Yeah.
And that boldness is what was needed. If you go back to the book of Acts, you would have seen that they lived through real persecution. And even the early church, under the likes of Domitian, under the likes of Nero, there was real persecution and there was real constraint. And there was both financial constraint, there was persecution in a fleshly, worldly sense, there was the threat of death. But yet, God was with them, and they recognized that. They recognized that they walked with the Holy Spirit inside them, and they were filled with that boldness. And that boldness meant that they did not go quietly into the night. Instead, they stood and they spoke out the truth. And if you look at Paul, he stood in front of council, pro-councils, and he spoke the truth.